everybody, Lucas Paratori here from Cloud Health by VMware, here to talk to you about how to drive a cost-conscious culture with FinOps within your company. So first we'll talk through Cloud Health by VMware and who we are, how we're integrated into VMware strategy. We'll talk about the evolution of FinOps, what we've seen in the market and where we feel like it's headed. We'll talk about how you can tackle FinOps with Cloud Health and use Cloud Health to create that FinOps culture at your company. And then lastly, some customer stories, some testimonials on how some of a Cloud Health's existing customers have been able to create and foster that culture within their organization. So first, where does Cloud Health fit into VMware? VMware is focusing more and more on a cloud-centric strategy, and Cloud Health is at the absolute center of that for public cloud. So we have Cloud Health, and then we also have Cloud Health Secure State. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this, but it's another product in the portfolio that is used for security management, while Cloud Health is more focused on cost management, optimization, and governance. So the first thing that Cloud Health is needed to do is expand and continue on its public cloud leadership. Gartner ranked Cloud Health the leader in public cloud cost management and optimization in Q4 of 2020, and we need to continue on with that. They're also looking for Cloud Health to enable VMware Cloud, and not just VMC on AWS, but the other cloud providers as well. And have Cloud Health be that normalization and that single pane that's cloud agnostic to be able to give you that visibility into your VMware spend. Lastly, for driving application awareness for cloud management across the entire organization. This is very important, and this is really the root of FinOps, is being able to get people caring about cloud that are not just the business owners and the engineers. So through the years, we've learned a couple things, and over managing over $13 billion in spend, over 100,000 policies created, millions of violations found, we found that you really need to focus in three key areas to build a successful cloud center of excellence: financial management, operations, and security and compliance. Cloud Health sits right in that financial management into operations area, while Cloud Health Secure State sits more between the operations and the security and compliance side. One of the things that we have at Cloud Health we talk a lot about is our cloud maturity curve, where it starts with visibility. You start to realize, hey, I'm spending too much, or maybe I have really poor tagging. And you start to want to put in some sort of guardrails, some rules, some optimizations to try to start training people on what types of actions they should take. At Cloud Health, what we hear from some companies is mostly they focus on optimization, but depending on like the dire need in the company, the culture and the profile of the people that are adopting FinOps, sometimes they may be focused a bit more on governance and automation as the big ticket items to be able to save money or be able to improve efficiency of their application, while most do focus on optimization. Now, once you've realized I'm spending too much, you've started to put in some rules, you've started to create this culture, the next thing is about integrating that with not just cloud costs, but your outside of cloud costs. This could be your labor, this could be your SaaS costs. This could be even like professional services engagements you're doing with other companies for specific customers, any sort of partnerships. So what you can then do is take those cloud costs, tie them together to get true customer KPIs in the context of your company and your business needs. This is where Cloud Health shines, is being able to take all of this information, aggregate it together, be a normalization. So we have one interface that you integrate with. We'll talk about Flex Reports as a SQL-based UI and API. You pull in all of these cloud costs, these non-cloud costs, and now you're only integrating with one single endpoint, and your automation is all now built and much easier to roll out and manage. So that's something that for us in Cloud Health, we are absolutely always looking to do, is help move companies along this maturity curve. Drilling a little bit more, we'll stick with financial management. And I just want to elaborate a little bit more on this because it's very important on how it can apply to the FinOps principles we'll get to in the next slides. So I mentioned visibility. So this is being able to not necessarily just see I'm spending too much, but see who is spending too much. Whether that's being able to leverage tags or labels that have been added at the resource, or maybe just like account groupings. You don't even need to get any more granular, but you need to be able to group multiple accounts to be able to charge back for those business units. You need to find optimization opportunities. ways that you can optimize costs, maybe at a resource level, like things like right sizing, or maybe at an aggregate level when you start thinking about making purchases for reservations and being able to cover your usage for your entire fleet versus now just thinking at a specific micro level. You also want to think about governance and automation. So being able to create policies that start and stop resources at night and in the morning. Maybe being able to create policies to identify unattached disks and unattached IP addresses. And then if you think back to this concept of CloudHealth being that normalization engine, you can now create a single policy that alerts you on unattached IP addresses for all clouds. You don't have to worry about some people knowing that an AWS IP addresses can only be unattached for 2 weeks, but then in another cloud provider, it's okay for an IP address to be unattached for 90 days. So being able to create one consistent rule and use CloudHealth to enforce that is something we've seen has been critical to adopt the FinOps culture. Lastly, it's this business integration. And this ties to the root of FinOps, which is that it is not something that you're going to do once and then you figured it out. You can take your hands off the wheel. No, it is always going to be maturing and changing, not just because the cloud is adapting, but you'll get smarter. You'll start to realize, you know what, we could shift this application to be more pass focused, or you know what, let's start running this application or as much of this application as serverless. So start being able to, in all of the optimizations that you previously then been put in for that IaaS or potentially PaaS workflow, now need to be adjusted for this serverless change. So it's not something that you're going to be able to just do once and step away from. It's going to be a way of life. So now what is FinOps? FinOps is the operating model for the cloud to be able to tie in stakeholders like executives, engineering and operations, finance, business owners, have these people talking daily, weekly, not just when they're applying for funding each year, but as they're rolling out, making changes to applications. Maybe they're about to spin up a new application and it's going to be expensive. Well, they reached out to finance and said, hey, I know we have funding, but we want to do this in a way that can be extra price savings. We want the application to not just roll out, but we want it to excel. We want performance and scalability to be an absolute fundamental building block of the application. And I can't sacrifice those things to just trying to save a buck. So that's where it really becomes powerful, is that FinOps is not about saving money. It's about making money and leveraging the cloud and the efficiencies and the scale of the cloud to be able to do that. There's some core FinOps principles to talk through, which you absolutely will have to make sure you build this within your organization. The first thing is teams need to collaborate. This is not just teams within developers collaborating, it's also stakeholders within business units. So the developers talking to finance, the product owners talking with the operations folks. The next thing which is important is everybody needs to take ownership for their cloud usage. This may be straightforward. You're thinking, yeah, I run an instance, I put a tag owner equals Lucas. I know that that's my instance. That's pretty straightforward if you do good tagging for instances or for resources. But that's not how the cloud works. There are shared services. There are Kubernetes clusters. And people need to be able to take ownership for that cloud usage that may not be as tangible as a specific resource. You also need a centralized team to drive FinOps. The organization, you can have a successful FinOps practice without this, but you're not going to have it grow. It's not going to be living. You're not going to have somebody that's going to be able to hold these teams accountable. You also need to be able to make sure that reports are accessible and timely. The speed of the cloud, I've talked about this. You know what else is the speed of the cloud? Is the way that your invoice can build. Costs can jump very fast. And if you're not getting reports updated at least daily with alerting like policies on projected cost or anomaly detection, applications are going to spin up and incur costs too fast for you to be able to jump on them. The next thing is decisions are driven by the business value of the cloud. One of the things that we talk at CloudHealth and most folks do is when you think about motivation, you have carrot or stick, and being able to get people to take action. And a lot of times what we have found is the stick may create the fastest change, and being able to send an email that, hey, if you don't tag this stuff, your VP and your manager are going to get an email. A lot of times those are the ones that will create action, but it puts a bad taste in your mouth. Then all you're thinking about is when I'm doing FinOps is just about preventing me from getting in trouble. All I'm doing is just trying to stay ahead of those emails alerting that, hey, I didn't tag these, or hey, I have this much unrealized savings. You also want to get some carrots, some ways to be able to create competition between people, to be able to remind people that, you know what, it's actually cool to save money. If you save this much money, maybe you're going to get an extra head count. There's some applications that, for instance, Spotify, if you look at their application, they give their recommendations in the context of an engineer. Well, you saved this much money, now you can hire an engineer. So it's kind of an interesting way to think about things, and another way to be able to motivate people that it's not just about wasted money, it's about your opportunity that you could be hiring engineers to improve your product. The last thing is to take advantage of the variable cost model of the cloud. So there are things like purchasing reserved instances and getting discounts. There are also right sizing. So you're no longer stuck with having an instance that is this many cores and RAM. If you're overutilizing it, change the size, spin it down, change the instance size, spin up a new one. So there's a really good opportunity for you to be able to save money in the cloud. And Cloud Health can be used to give these recommendations. So we have those. We also have the phases. And this is what's important to note, is that you'll notice it's a wheel and it keeps going. It is not something that once you have built in these governance and these operations, you're going to be able to stop worrying about this. It's going to feed back into the next. You make these changes, you'll start to get smarter. You'll go from IaaS to PaaS, and then you'll realize, you know what? It's time for me to move that part of the application off that. So you'll start with that inform. You know what? You're spending too much. You should shift. You start to optimize. You know what? I've made these changes. I'm starting to run a more optimized environment, but you know what? There's probably still some opportunities to save money. And as you start to define these, you know what? My infrastructure is optimized, but as an organization, we want to be able to have a more scalable solution. We need to containerize our application because our workloads are so volatile and so potentially not seasonal, maybe hourly, maybe time of day, that you need an application that can spin up and down, that can handle that, but also save money. So there's an opportunity in a way for you to, as you improve your application, you'll want to continue going back to that inform and operate lifestyle. So the FinOps domains, we'll drill in a little bit more, and what you're going to start to now see is how we lay these steps in with Cloud Health. So understanding your cloud usage and cost. It's not just about resource metadata and tagging and adding the owner tag. It's about knowing within that resource hierarchy who should charge back on this. For instance, you have EC2 instances and you have EBS volumes. Just because your EC2 instance was tagged doesn't mean that somebody actually tagged the EBS volume, but chances are you are concerned about that cost. So being able to keep in mind, if you allocate the instance, being concerned about that EBS volume or the attached IP, and having a true understanding of your resource hierarchy. That's an area that Cloud Health can help you. There's also performance tracking and benchmarking, being able to be alerted if you're approaching budgets, and also being able to keep track of where you're sitting and compared against your peers. This is one area that Cloud Health is really able to shine and be able to leverage the 13 billion plus a month or in annual spend that we manage, because what we do is our customer success team works with you to provide visibility on your benchmarking. And this is not just benchmarking within your cloud costs in terms of how much your tagging is, what is your spend breakdown between services compared to storage, compared to PaaS versus IaaS. It's also adoption of Cloud Health. And this can be really powerful when you start to compare yourself and benchmark yourself against other companies that are adopting a FinOps practice. And you start to realize that, wow, you're doing a great job. You have a lot of people using policies. You have a lot of people with daily saved reports that are getting these. Or maybe on the flip side, when you start comparing yourself and benchmarking to the other companies in your size, and you tell us you want us to benchmark to other companies in similar spend and cloud spend. Maybe employee size or revenue size or vertical. These are all different ways that you can benchmark yourselves using our customer success team against those metrics. You need to optimize. You need to be able to get reports delivered in a timely manner. We'll talk through that as well. How Cloud Health can be used, whether it's scheduled reports, APIs, but being able to get that data to you as fast as possible in a cleaned up way that is in the context of your application and your organization is absolutely critical. Also about cloud rate optimization. So being able to give right sizing recommendations, savings plans purchase, committed use discounts for other cloud providers, being able to leverage usage volume discounts. And so this is an absolutely important other part of being able to optimize and save money. And then lastly, the operation and being able to operate. So having things like policies and automation built in to be able to start and stop resources, being able to say, you know what, if you don't launch an instance with the environment tag, we're going to stop that thing. If you don't take snapshots of your volumes within 90 days, we're going to be deleting those. So you better take care of that and be able to take these actions before these automations take action. Lastly, this is that KPI, being able to develop KPIs, looking at your trends, and being able to, as an organization, get behind those KPIs. No matter what business unit you're in, you know that as an organization, you guys are tracking effective on-demand rate or life of wasted resources so that everybody knows that they're being held accountable to those metrics and KPIs. So now a little bit more of the fun stuff. How can Cloud Health be used to do this? So one of the big bread and butters of Cloud Health is perspectives. This is the ability for you to group resources based off of any piece of metadata. And you can do this in the context of your business and your organization. So a lot of times we see companies using perspectives to create applications or create business units. And they'll look at across all their clouds. Anytime a resource has the environment tag, allocate those costs and either create a new group if we see an environment equals staging 2, or if we see an existing environment staging, but we already created that in AWS, but we just launched a new infrastructure in another cloud, we'll automatically allocate that and give you that view and that single pane of glass for your application. So this is really where we see Cloud Health being able to take a step up and being able to be that normalization engine. And it's important also to know that this is integrated into all parts of the platform. So you'll see, especially when I go through the demo, perspectives are integrated into the reports. They're integrated into policies. They're integrated into anomaly detection. And this is a big differentiator for us, especially with anomaly detection, because changes may happen that are expected for one application, but they may have an unexpected impact on another application. And application A team that had that change isn't concerned about that. They don't need that noise. They don't want all these alerts. But the other application team who did not actually have that deploy and was not expecting that, they need to be notified. So this is where perspectives and pulling in that business context can become especially powerful. So the next thing where it can also be used for is understanding your cloud usage and cost. And one new investment area for us is around tag management. So being able to, for all of your cloud providers, see the number of unique values within each tag key and what are the resources that make up those tags. So this can become really powerful when you start to transition tagging policies, because rarely this will happen where your first tagging policy you roll out is your last. You may end up having to make some changes. And Cloud Health can be used to be that cleaning engine as you make that transition. We also have a feature called custom line items that allows you to manipulate, mark up and down costs as they come from the cloud provider. This is especially powerful if you have a CCOE, a Cloud Center of Excellence team that is doing specific implementations for teams. Maybe you did a RI recommendation. You want to charge back that team a certain amount. Maybe you also allow teams to purchase reservations and get discounts but you also want to charge up and mark up that cost a little bit higher than the discounted rate. So teams are still paying less on demand, but because you're managing those, you're able to still get a little bit of a margin. We also have cost reallocation. This is for being able to share and manage shared services. So this will come up a lot, especially when we talk about containers a little bit later on. But how can you share costs that may not be at a specific resource, or they are? Let's say you have a specific instance that you want to share the cost of that specific resource across multiple teams. You'd have that flexibility to be able to reallocate those costs that way. The last step of this, before we move on to the next phase, is around performance tracking and benchmarking and forecasting. So Cloud Health has a forecasting engine that can look at what your costs are, whether you look at a macro level, or you could leverage perspectives and start to say, for this specific application, how is this application tracking? But being able to give a forecasting based off of however many months, maybe you operate yearly and you want to look at the last 12, or maybe you're just concerned about what the last quarter was. You could say, give me the last 3 months, and then what would it look like if I forecast those out for the next 3 months? So being able to use Cloud Health for that forecasting engine has been very powerful, especially when tied with policies. Because what would happen is as you're approaching, let's say, hey, I'm approaching my budget and I've hit 95% of my budget, and again, you can create that budget in the context of your application, you can start to now be alerted as you approach that or exceed it. Next, you start to have the optimize and how you can use Cloud Health to do that. The first thing we'll talk about is anomaly detection. So you can use this to be able to keep track for your multi-cloud environment for big cost changes. And this is very powerful because it's integrated with perspectives. You may have a cost change that in the grand scheme of things, under $1 million of spend is not so big and is pretty typical if you think about all of your applications, if you're constantly spinning up new applications maybe. But for one specific application that is not changing often and having a quick jump, that may be something that you want to keep track of. So Cloud Health is analyzing the perspective groups in the memberships in addition to your service and total level cost. We leverage a number of different machine learning and AI algorithms to do this. And this is one thing that we found is powerful for the multi-cloud because we're now able to give you an approach, anomaly detection the same across all of your clouds and on-prem environment. We also have savings plans and committed use discount and RI recommendations features. So where you have the ability to configure and have Cloud Health look at all of your usage, look at any sort of expiring reservations or savings plans that you have, and then make a recommendation on what the best price savings and purchase would be in the context of your risk profile. So you'll notice right here, you have the ability to specify the recommendation option if you want to maximize the savings, if you want to specify an hourly commitment total, or what your total coverage, what you want your total coverage to be. So you have that flexibility if you want to say, Cloud Health, show me how much money I can save, or Cloud Health, I only have this much money, but show me how much money I can save if I was to spend all of that. And not only do we have the ability to generate these recommendations, you can also create policies to be able to alert you on any sort of underutilization of reservations, but also underutilization of resources. So if you have a resource that is under 10% CPU utilization for a certain amount of time, you could be able to be alerted on that. Or another thing is you have savings plans or reserved instances that are not being utilized. You can see every month you have all of the hours going unused. You can use Cloud Health to look at that usage and make a change if you want to do a convertible RI exchange, or potentially, let's say you have maybe multiple consolidated families and maybe you'd want to move those reserved instances in that linked account to another consolidated family to be able to get the benefit of that usage. These are the types of things you should be thinking about and questioning is when does it make sense to potentially make this change to be able to get additional price savings. We also want to talk about containers and being able to charge back based off of the utilization of that container instead of the actual definitive resourcing. So here we are explaining that you have a namespace with multiple microservices running within it. And those namespaces are made up across multiple nodes. And those nodes, as you can understand, that's what you pay to the cloud provider. You're not paying AWS to have a namespace. You're paying them for the infrastructure. I mean, unless we start getting PASI and serverless. But in general, in this context, we're paying the cloud provider for the node that you have a namespace with microservices that are shared among teams. So what you need to be able to do is take those costs for those microservices in those namespaces and charge them back to those teams. So what you can do is use Cloud Health to create reallocation rules to be able to allocate those costs based off of the users that use them, based off of potentially the CPU or the memory utilization. You'd be able to create these rules and charge them back. So lastly, it's important to note that we support this from a multi-cloud and cloud agnostic perspective. So whether you are self-managing your clusters and running them on EC2 instances or Azure VMs or another cloud provider, or if you are running and leveraging the PaaS services and not managing the infrastructure at all, you can use Cloud Health to manage those costs and that usage and be able to do the chargeback purposes that way. You can also create these policies to be able to alert you for things like aging snapshots, unattached EBS volumes, things like that. So being able to create these single policies, have them run every day. Sometimes it may create a little bit too much noise. Maybe you have them run on Fridays. These are your Friday policies that alert you for any sort of optimization opportunities going into the weekend. These are the kinds of practices that you build within your organization. Maybe you call it Savings Policy Fridays, that every Friday everybody gets their email alerts saying, hey, everybody, you created all these resources this week. Maybe you want to think about these optimization opportunities for those resources. So being able to create consistency and predictability is one of the biggest parts that were most critical things we've found to being able to get and have a FinOps culture adopted within the organization. People sometimes don't know what the rules are, know what they should be doing. So the first step is being able to create these policies, creating these reports to let people know, hey team, this is what you should be doing. This is the best practice if you want to create a multi-cloud environment like this. We also have a feature within Cloud Health called FlexOrgs. So this is very powerful in being able to organize and segregate user access within Cloud Health. So you may be thinking of organizations in AWS very similar to this, being able to assign accounts to different organizations and then giving users access to those organizations to have a limited view of those accounts. But what you can do with Cloud Health is create tiered organizations as well and say, you know what, user, you are an admin of these 3 accounts. But for the entire business unit, for these 30 in this organization, you can only have read access. So being able to break down Cloud Health in the organization in the context of the user's role is especially important. Then we have governance policies we've talked about, and these policies live within an organization. So within each organization in Cloud Health, users either can create policies or a centrally managed team could take those policies, push them down from the top level so that all organizations within the Cloud Health tenant have these same policies. This is where it gets into the play where a central team is pushing down these policies and best practices, but you also give the teams the ability and the autonomy to create these policies themselves and to be able to take control in their own hands. So what we hear and work with a lot of our customers is that middle ground, where you have the best practices, but then also within each business unit and teams, people create policies themselves. Lastly, we have Flex reports. And this is that single page, that single API that you can use to collect all of your cloud costs, whether it's AWS or another cloud provider. You can use our either drag and drop. We'll get into this in the demo. You can do drag and drop. You can run SQL commands, whether that's through the UI or through our API, to be able to work with that data, joining different data sets to really take action on that granular data and be able to put this data in the hands of everyone in a consistent single endpoint experience. So now I'm going to walk through the demo and what it looks like to use the platform, create some policies, and have a little fun.
All right, so welcome to Cloud Health. The first thing you'll notice when you log in, you have the ability to switch to other clouds. You'll default to AWS. You'll be presented with the default dashboard. Now, right here is the default. Now, you may customize that and create your own default dashboard. So when you log in, it's whatever your reports are that are most important to you. What we typically hear from our customers is they'll create a number of default dashboards that they push out to all their users. Maybe an example is a savings plan dashboard to help create a consistent view so that throughout the month, people are looking at the same reports, looking at the same metrics. It can become really difficult when folks are looking at different reports, and then all of a sudden every 6 to 9 months, 12 months when you start applying for budgeting, people have been looking at different reports speaking a different language. So starting with your default dashboards, having users logging in, thinking of their cloud costs and setting that standard is a really important first step. We also do allow users to create their own dashboard. So maybe I'm a finance user and I'm also concerned about amortization, not just who purchased it, but who used it. So this would be an example where I've created this custom dashboard specific to myself to be able to view that and the perspective that's most important to me. I do want to take just a moment to walk through perspectives. I know I mentioned them previously, but I think this one use case will help kind of tell a better story. So perspectives are that grouping engine. Sometimes grouping is really simple. So right here is a really simple group. Anywhere that we see CHT function equals billing. Really straightforward. We only saw one S3 bucket with that. But maybe historically you've changed your tagging. Maybe you've renamed it. It's gone from ENV to environment or function to sub-function. Then things get a little bit more complicated. With perspectives, fortunately, they don't have to be. So what we've done here is we've grouped anywhere that we saw CHT function or CHT sub-function where it equals wavefront. So maybe we made a change a year ago and stopped calling things functions and started always calling them sub-functions. But there were deleted resources that you couldn't go back and manually update the tags. So what you can do is still create a rule in Cloud Health to allocate those resources. So your one wavefront group actually includes multiple different tag values. So now we've created a perspective. Let's start having some fun playing with it in reports. So I switched over to Flex Reports. So this is a new reporting experience that has both a drag, drop, click experience as well as a SQL query option. Well, first, I'm going to just start really basic. Let's pull in some amortized costs from the CUR. Let's pull in a perspective. We were looking at the sub-function one, so let's pull that one in. As you start pulling these things in, this report preview pane will start to populate. I want to look at my things by month. I also want to start using the reporting preview. So I'm going to look at things in a bar chart, continue month. I'm also going to change the category. So now I can see for this specific charge, we can start to now charge back to these specific different queue and processing queues. So this is our RDS processing. And this amortization charge should be charged back based off of this usage. Now, this is a pretty straightforward example. You'll notice the SQL query, pretty straightforward. You have the also ability to really get a bit more technical and start to do things like identifying savings. So here I'll just pull up quickly an example of another template that's been created for identifying savings plans, savings per day. So here's an example where you have the ability to view what those costs are at a per day level using a SQL query. And you can either write that through the UI, or you could write that through an API and access this data programmatically. So now we've gotten some visibility. Let's start moving into governance and optimization. We have our policy engine to do that. First, I'll talk through an optimization opportunity. So being able to alert on unattached volumes. So you probably want to set up some sort of policy internally that says you can't have a volume that's unattached for longer than, I don't know what you want to say, 90 days. And maybe you're ruthless and you're just going to delete those if that happens. Maybe you're a bit more forgiving and you'll want to create an EBS snapshot. And then after that, delete them. You have the ability to create workflows to do that. Or maybe you just want to create an email alert and email somebody and let them know, hey, your EBS volume has been unattached for 90 days. You should do something about it. So you'll have that flexibility. You could also create a policy around budgeting. Let's say you've created a budget and you want to be alerted as you approach 80%, 100% of that projected budget. So not only if you hit that budget, but if you're approaching hitting that budget. So this can become really powerful for our customers. But this also can only be powerful if, one, you have a budget set, or two, you're in a position in a month where this anomaly would then cause you to break past that budget. If this is the first, second, third of a month, an anomaly probably isn't going to send you over your budget. What we've done is we've now introduced anomaly detection. This is the final step. So what we're doing here is analyzing the CUR based on when we collect it. So this is not limited by any sort of like overnight processing or anything like that. What we're doing is we're running this analysis against that file using a number of different machine learning algorithms. You may be wanting to see all the anomalies. Maybe you're like me and you're only concerned about maybe some of the bigger ones. I've filtered to the ones that are over 500. Looking down, CloudTrail 800, that seems pretty concerning. So I'm going to click into that. Well, yeah, that is pretty anomalous. Here's an example where I would want to look into this, potentially drill into it. Maybe I want to provide feedback on this. So you now have the ability to say, you know what, this was unexpected. This was expected, but it also was an anomaly. Let's collect that data. This wasn't expected, or no, this is an anomaly, and this is how the platform works. So this will help CloudHealth's algorithm adjust to be able to make better recommendations in the future. I'm not going to submit it because they're a production account, but you can imagine if I'd hit that submit feedback button there. So that's the end. Those are ways that you can use CloudHealth to establish a cost-conscious culture of FinOps within your organization.
All right, and now that we've walked through the platform, I just want to spend a couple minutes as well as talking about how some of our existing companies and customers of CloudHealth have leveraged CloudHealth and where that's fit in when we think about the FinOps principles. So Toast is a Boston-based company used for point-of-sale systems to be able to do payment processing for retailers, especially like restaurants. So when COVID happened, COVID-19 started, Toast came to CloudHealth looking for an opportunity to save money. And Toast was currently operating, they had a CCOE already established. They knew that they should be saving money. They had a team working on it, but they didn't have the ability to push these out to their users within the organization. They didn't have a good single application to be able to create that FinOps culture outside of their Cloud Center of Excellence team. And that's what they used CloudHealth to do. They leveraged reports like the unattached EBS volumes report, the RDS instances report, to be able to push these down to their users, to have them checking these reports on a day-to-day basis. So this is an example where they're able to enable their teams to create ownership, leveraging their Cloud Center of Excellence. And the most important thing is checking it early and often. The next customer is Segment. Segment absolutely embodied the FinOps environment and culture by driving accountability to their engineers in a FinOps and financial mind. They used CloudHealth for their shared services for clusters, big containers shop, and being able to use CloudHealth and get this visibility for containers at the namespace level in their engineers' hands for them to be able to take action. So being able to create ownership and put this data in this financial-minded data in the hands of developers in a single pane of glass. So they were able to identify significant increase in their gross margin, and they used Cloud Health to help do that. And when we think back to the whole stick versus carrot, this is a really strong example where they were able to use both and be able to identify large savings at a macro level, but also have people and hold people accountable and engineers accountable to be able to drive cost optimization and visibility within their clusters. The last customer to talk through is Experian and how they used Cloud Health to drive FinOps within their enterprise-wide organization. So for Experian, they needed a single pane of glass that scaled with a company their size, with a spend their size, with a user base their size. So they use Cloud Health in the power of FlexOrgs to be able to create organizations with user-specific permissioning that may not be the same at each level of the hierarchy. They leveraged many of the cost savings reports and have seen a total of about 1.7 million in savings opportunities since adopting Experian. So they've been a really strong driver of our enterprise roadmap and a great partner with us as we start to tackle use cases of customers with thousands of users. And thank you all for joining. Really appreciate you taking the time to listen into this, and hope that you take this and you're able to take what you've learned here and help drive a stronger FinOps culture within your organization.